Welcome back to Hey Kentucky. Amidst all the coronavirus headlines, a lot of our Kentucky politicians in Washington have made headlines of their own. Mitch McConnell, Rand Paul, and Thomas Massie, to name a few. We are very pleased to be joined today by Congressman Thomas Massie to talk about a variety of different topics. Thank you so much for joining us from Kentucky's 4th District, by the way. Beautiful virtual background there of your farm.
Yep, this is my farm here. And it's been nice spending some time on the farm, but I'm itching to go back to Washington, D.C.
I want to start today by talking about the PRIME Act. And if you could kind of walk us through a little bit about what that means and why it's so important now, because this is something you've been trying to get through for a couple of years.
Yeah, for 5 years, I've been warning that our food supply is brittle because 4 companies control 80% of the meat processing in the United States. And I know there's an alternative here in Kentucky because I've been using it. There are a lot of custom processing facilities or slaughterhouses, if you will. A lot of farmers use these facilities to sell beef directly to consumers. But if you want to go through one of those processors, you have to sell somebody half a cow. And a lot of people can't afford half a cow. I've got a bill that you mentioned called the PRIME Act. It stands for Processing Revival Intrastate Meat Exemption. And that bill would allow these local processors here in Kentucky, who aren't owned by the Chinese and aren't owned by Brazilians, they're actually owned by sole proprietors. It would allow them to sell individual cuts of meat and hamburger in the supermarket as long as they don't cross state lines. So the bill says if the farmers in Kentucky and the processors in Kentucky, the grocery stores in Kentucky, and the transaction happens in Kentucky, knock yourselves out. As long as you're complying with state law and the local health department, you're all good.
So the opposition would say this gets rid of maybe some regulations where food safety is concerned. Do you disagree with that?
Well, the opposition is the 4 big meat packers. They're multinational companies, and they're actually the only ones who've had recalls of meat. The irony is they're USDA inspected, but every year you hear some story of millions of pounds of hamburger or some kind of meat coming back because of salmonella or E. coli. And so they've got the burden of proof on themselves to prove that my solution is less safe than their solution, because what my solution provides is accountability of the farmer and the meat processor. You would know where the animal came from and who the processor was.
So you've been trying to get this through, like you said, for 5 years. Do you have more co-sponsors now than ever before?
I have picked up 12 co-sponsors in the last 2 weeks. You know, when people started seeing images of slaughter-ready hogs being euthanized and dumped in a pile and then destroyed instead of going into our food supply, that was a real wake-up call for not just consumers, but also for farmers. So 12 congressmen have joined the bill. Already had 24 congressmen on it. There are 7 Democrats and 1 independent among those 36 sponsors in the House. And in the Senate, we have Senator Angus King, who's got a great name for sponsoring this bill. He's introduced the bill in the Senate, and Senator Rand Paul, Senator Lamar Alexander, and Senator Marsha Blackburn are the co-sponsors there.
I want to switch gears here to the coronavirus, and there have been 2 major stimulus packages that have gone through relatively easily, but you voted no on the second one. Can you tell me why?
Sure. Yeah, and thanks for pointing that out. I did vote yes on the first one. It was $8 billion and addressed the virus itself. The other bills have addressed the economic calamity that's resulted not just from the virus, but also from governors like our own governor shutting down our economies. Now, there's an argument to be made that people have been deprived of their livelihoods by the government, and so the government needs to make those folks whole. The problem is it should be the state government that's going to compensate individuals for the things that the state governments do. The federal government shouldn't be handing out $600 checks every week if you don't work. The problem with that, a lot of small business owners are telling me, is they can't get their employees to come back to work. And in order to qualify for the PPP loan forgiveness, they have to get the employees to come back to work. So my problem with the big stimulus bills is they're not paid for, and the unintended consequences haven't been thought about, and it's not very well controlled. I mean, we've been sending stimulus checks to dead people here in Kentucky.
So I do want to ask you about Governor Beshear and really governors across the country. I feel like a lot of times they are taking their lead from the federal government, even though President Trump has said it's up to the states to do their thing, but they're kind of following what they're hearing from the White House. How do you feel like that? And now it's up to the states to make good with the unemployed.
Well, I do think that the sort of some of the advisement from Dr. Fauci and some of the president's other advisors has been a little overzealous, I would say, in terms of the economic fallout. On a conference call with Dr. Fauci, some of us were asking him, have you thought about the ill effects to people from a bad economy? In other words, is the most compassionate and healthy thing to keep everybody at home, or do you at some point start causing health problems there? And we've seen, that our rural hospitals here in Kentucky, for instance, have had to lay off people and had to cut their hours because of, as you pointed out, the lead that's been put out by the federal government that some of the states have followed in terms of banning elective procedures. And so I think we've crossed the line. And whether you want to put the blame on Governor Beshear or on President Trump's advisors, I think we've crossed the line. And I think right now we're causing more injury to citizens than we are saving them from.
Congressman Thomas Massie, we do appreciate you spending some time with us today. Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.
All right, more Hey Kentucky right after this.